So in this fight, right, to defend the English language, um, what does defending English really mean? Orwell says, well, I'll get to that in a second. I first want to tell you what it doesn't mean. And defending English is not like standardizing it. Orwell doesn't care about that. That's not his concern. So as he says here, the defense of the English language implies a lot more than just simply worrying about Latin creeping into English or anything like that. Let's look at defending English by first looking at what it doesn't mean to defend English. Okay, so it doesn't mean standardizing. So it's not about that kind of stuff. It's nothing to do with archaism, with salvaging of obsolete words and turns of speech, or setting up a standard English, which must never be departed from. He's not trying to set up, let's say, the English that he likes of his time in England, and then saying, oh, that particular version of English, that's not really a particular, it's a universal, and sort of that standard thing, taking your particular ideas and projecting or passing them off as if they're universal. That's not what he's interested in. He doesn't even worry about the use of Americanisms. That's a term that they used back then for certain terms coming from the United States and from North America in general, different uses. He doesn't care about that. Go ahead and use different kinds of Americanisms. He's not even talking about quote unquote good prose style. It doesn't simply, and he also says, keep that in mind when we get down to number 5. He says, look, it doesn't mean that you always have to use the Anglo-Saxon, the English word, and never use a Latin word, never use a Greek word. I'm not saying that. If you really need the Greek word, let's say you're writing about Aristotle and you're writing about Aristotle on eudaimonia, which is a very specific Greek term that Aristotle uses, and yeah, fine, you might use it there, but you wouldn't use it in ordinary circumstances. You would use an ordinary English word like happiness. That's Orwell's point. So it's never the case that you can always jettison other terms. So he's actually fairly flexible here. What above all is needed is to let the meaning choose the word rather than the other way around. The worst thing you can do with words is to surrender to them, to be, as Wittgenstein might say, to be bewitched by language, right? And just, oh, I want to use that word. And so don't fall prey to the, I want to use that word, and then you're going to, cram it in somewhere because it makes your prose look smart, right? That leads to bad writing that Orwell's talking about, where you could use a word even if you don't understand it, and you aren't even really sure what the sentence means. So when you think of something abstract, you're more inclined to use words from the start. That's why Orwell was so worried about the loss of the concrete, because when we talk in abstractions, we're more likely to use a lot of words, and the meaning is really kind of just dependent on the words that we use. And Orwell thinks that you kind of have a grasp of meanings prior to words, and you look for the words to fit the meaning. Very controversial position, but basically he's trying to get us to avoid being slaves to language, right? And just always following language. So it's probably better to put off your words using words as long as possible and get your meanings as clear as you can through pictures of sensation. That's an interesting point. So in writing, he is advocating that you try and think in terms of images as much as you can, and then look for the words that will fit what you're going after, as opposed to relying too much on words. So afterwards, one can choose not simply accept the phrases that will best cover the meaning. So you keep your intellectual autonomy, so to speak. So then you switch around and decide what impression one's words are likely to make on another person. This last effort of the mind cuts out all stale and mixed images and prefabricated phrases, needless repetitions, and humbug and vagueness generally. So with that in mind, it's not trying to standardize, it's trying to keep yourself open, but not open to words just flooding in and cramming in and pushing you around. Rather, you have kind of a meaning that you're after, and you're then after the words that will express that meaning. So then, to conclude the essay, Orwell says something like this. I think the following rules. Now, this is important. I think the following rules will cover most cases. Some people think that George Orwell set these down as like absolute and fixed rules. Well, that would defeat the whole thing, because that would be more like a standardizing thing. He doesn't think you can standardize good writing. That's not what this essay, if you think that's what he's after, you've kind of missed the point of his essay. The point of his essay is how to, get better at good writing, but it's not like he's going to give you some magic list that you just tick off all the boxes and bang, you're going to produce good writing. He even has a comment about that at the end. So let's look at his list. It's a very famous list, and it's the list that's often cited by writing instructors for students. Avoid old metaphors. We've seen him talk about metaphors, so avoid the ones that you see all the time. That's a good kind of rule. If you see a metaphor often written down, try and avoid it, because chances are it's a dead one or a dying one. Long words, well, fine, if that's the word you need. If you need a big complex word and it's a big long word, well, that's fine. But don't use a big long word if a short one will do, right? So cut words out if possible, right? Always ask yourself, is this word necessary to push my argument along, or does it add anything? If not, get rid of it. Passive voice, if you use it, that's fine. But if you can use the active, flip to the active. He's not saying never use the passive. He's just saying don't use it if you can use the active. If you can't use the active, well then fine, use the passive. But it's better off if you have a choice between active and passive, go for the active. Foreign terms like Greek, Latin, scientific jargon, if you can, use a regular word. So in like ordinary essay writing, that's not technical, use the ordinary word. If you're writing on a highly technical piece like Aristotle or quantum physics, of course you're going to use the appropriate terminology or jargon. That's not a problem. But you don't need that in sort of everyday essay writing. And then last but not least, to sort of sum all this up and reflect this, not standardizing anything, ignore this, right? Because it's not going to produce perfect writing. All Orwell says is that if you follow these rules, you're not going to produce the kind of bad writing that he more or less kind of mocked at the beginning of the essay, those 5 examples that he said are, by those academics and a variety. There are clear examples of bad writing. You can avoid those if you have these lists, but if you follow this list. But if you follow this list, Orwell doesn't promise you're going to have great writing. You're just going to avoid some of the worst of the worst. So, and if you look at the last paragraph of the essay, Orwell says that I haven't been considering the literary use, but merely language as an instrument for expressing and not concealing or preventing thought. And he doesn't agree that abstract words are meaningless. No, he says that just because you can't define perfectly a term like fascism, that doesn't mean that if you can't, if you can't define something, that you can't struggle against it. So he's like, don't go down that route of getting a kind of political quietism because you're stumped for defining the things that you think you're against. He doesn't agree with that. One needs not to swallow such absurdities as this, but recognize that the present political chaos is connected with the decay of language. Well, that could be kind of relevant for us today. And that one can probably bring about some improvements by starting at the verbal end. Simplify your English, you're freed from the worst follies of orthodoxy. You cannot speak any of the necessary dialects, and when you make a stupid remark, its stupidity will be obvious even to yourself. If you speak simply, you're going to catch your own silliness, is Orwell's point. So, in sum, he gives us sort of like a what now? What will this lead to? And that makes the ending of the essay more of a conclusion, like a, well, after what I said previously, what now? As opposed to the ending just being a straightforward summary. So there you have it. There's a few reflections on George Orwell's great essay, Politics and the English Language.